and we think, given that there is an and housing crisis impacting on workers, on students, on pensioners, on those on low and average incomes, that we need radical measures in this budget and the dire state of our public services, and indeed the existential threat of climate change, all of which we think the government are failing utterly to address. And in particular, in this budget, we are trying to challenge the narrative of the government where they say that you can't spend too much money addressing the cost of living crisis or the housing crisis or funding our public services because somehow it will cause inflation. Now, we utterly reject that argument in how we have framed this budget. Cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, the lack of funding from our public services result from profiteering and a growing and gross inequality in the distribution of wealth. It's greedflation that is to address the cost of living hikes that people are facing, or spend more to deliver public and affordable housing, or put more money into health and education and childcare, disability, or the other areas where people in this country are really suffering hardship and intense pressure. So that's what our budget, or to put it another way, we are saying there's more than enough resources and wealth in our society to address the housing and cost of living crisis and to resource our public services and to deal with climate change. But what's lacking is the political will on the part of the government to deal with the profiteering of big corporations, of banks, of energy companies, of vulture funds and corporate. If you do those things, you can actually solve relatively quickly the problems that are facing working class people, students, pensioners, people with disabilities, and all those who are suffering hardship and in many cases facing real crisis situations, driven into homelessness, unable to pay their energy bills, making choice family. So, I mean, I won't obviously go through all of the details. People will need to read the document. But some of the things that we are proposing are to address, obviously, the housing crisis is an absolute urgent priority. So we are proposing to double the output of for all targets next year and in the coming years. And we are also proposing, as part of delivering the social and affordable and cost rental housing that we need, to establish a state construction deliver the social and affordable housing that we so urgently need. We obviously believe that to address this shocking and staggering level of rents, you need the introduction of things like rent controls. But in the short term, or until the government are willing to actually do that, we also think that the renters' tax and the HAP limits, which are way below the level of rents out there, need to be increased. But I want to stress that we're talking about doing that only until we introduce what's really needed to address the staggering level of rents, the introduction of proper rent controls, the set rents at affordable levels. We also want to introduce punitive, use it or lose it taxes on vacant homes, derelict homes, and zoned residential land that is being hoarded by property speculators and property developers. On the cost of living side, the cost of living hikes and lifted out of poverty. So we're proposing that basic social welfare, pension, disability payments would be raised to €300 per week, but with an additional €50 per week as a cost of disability payment, because we know people others which they need to be given assistance in order to live and not be driven into poverty. We're also proposing to abolish the universal social charge completely for those earning less than €100,000, to index link tax allowances, and to give a 10% pay increase to all of those in the public sector in order to compensate for the loss of income in real terms that people have suffered as a result of the cost of living hikes, and to raise the minimum wage to a living wage of at least €15 an hour. We're also proposing increasing child benefit by 20% and capping the energy prices, and taking the energy sector fully back into public ownership and operating on a not-for-profit basis in order to cut energy bills to the average level of those in Europe. Because currently we're paying about 80 to 90% more than people in Europe. So we don't accept, if you like, if the argument of the government is the reason that we've seen these price hikes is because of the war. And we believe the answer is the profiteering of the big energy companies. So we want to cap what they can charge people for gas, for electricity, and bring the entire energy sector back into public ownership. The last point I'll make is that we think, without causing inflation, we do not accept the argument that simply compensating people for the loss of income they have suffered as a result of the cost of living hikes, or providing people with public housing and affordable housing, or funding our public services somehow cause inflation. It's simply bringing people up to the level they were before this cost of living crisis started, and what you can pay for the additional public spending, for the cost of living measures and the public service investment, by taxing the staggering level of profits, closing off the corporate tax loopholes, increasing the level of corporate tax to 20%, which is what every ordinary worker has to pay, introducing things like a digital tax, a tax on the social media and digital companies, which then could be used to fund public service broadcasting, the arts, sports, community investment, and so on. We're also proposing windfall tax on the energy companies and higher income tax. So there's plenty of money if the government are willing to go after it, and a wealth tax, very importantly, I should stress, a wealth tax which is aimed at those, the top 10% of our population who, according to the central bank in a report earlier this year, have more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. So aggregate household wealth in this country is now in excess of €1 trillion. But according to the central bank, 54% of that is in the hands of the richest 10%. So we believe a modest wealth tax of 2%, excluding family homes, imposed on the richest 10% of our population, would actually generate nearly €6 billion in additional. Reid and Bernard then just to add a little bit more detail.
Okay.
Do you mind, Pat? Thanks for that.
Here introducing it has childcare issues, so she couldn't come, so I'm filling in for her. So I think Richard's gone through some of it, but I think this week in particular, or last week in particular, showed how the issue of child sort of hodgepodge of systems that the government have created, but a lot of them find it difficult to by this state, and so we would propose increasing their pay immediately by €2 an hour. We also and we want to see more parental leave, more maternity leave and more parental leave that would allow both parents. You guys probably know, but most men don't avail of parental leave because they only get such a meagre payment from their total wage that they don't avail of it. We want to see fathers and mothers have to bring that paid leave for mothers and fathers up by 28 weeks, and with a cost of 487 million, and force or oblige the employers to top up all parent benefits to 100%, at least by €2 an hour. That'll be in addition 142 million, and double the current funding for children with disabilities. Bernard will address a lot of that. That would be another 45 million. So in total, we're looking at an additional investment to also bring by degrees and not model, such as they have in many European countries like Sweden, where you wouldn't do this to your kids when you send them to national school, expect them to go into a mishmash of private, public, community-based education. We want to see early years education treated in the same way, and that would be a huge amount, but actually it brings us much closer to the European average. We're way behind. So that's all the figures, a bit tedious, but they're in the document.
Bernard Mulvaney, who is a People for Profit representative. Oh, sorry. Bernard Mulvaney, who's People for Profit representative for the Dublin Bay North area. And a champion of disability activism and campaign.
Yeah, I just want to really more so address the issues around disability. I just want to take us back to 2020 when the government commissioned a cost of disability report. That report actually went up on government.gov.ie in 2021, and it stated that people with disabilities need on average €8,500 to €12,500 more per year than everybody else just to get by, just to survive. That was before we had a cost of living crisis, before we had the inflation crisis we're living in now, we had a fuel crisis. The government did nothing, absolutely nothing on that. That has sat on ministers' desks, it has sat on gov.ie with zero. Just last week, the RSI dropped another report stating that the current crisis has seen an increase of people with disabilities in their families to nearly 40%. 40% of people with disabilities in their families are living in abject poverty. It's the highest demographic in our society. We listened all intently when COVID hit to Leo Varadkar tell us all that we needed to put in place a pandemic unemployment payment, and that was formed around the minimum needed to survive in Ireland before there was a cost of living crisis, and that was deemed €350. At that time, people with disabilities were getting €208 a week, carers were getting €220 a week, and pensioners were getting €254. And a lot of the time we include pensioners along with ourselves because many pensioners live with a long-term illness, or as they get older they become less mobile, so effectively they're acquiring a disability. We thought at the time €350 was the minimum needed to survive. Surely we need the minimum to survive. In fact, we need more, but that would be a benchmark, that would be a start. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. And what we've seen now is a gradual decrease in our standard of living. People with disabilities are in deeper poverty than what they were before, as joining with us. The reason being, people with disabilities are on the margins. Carers and the families that care for people with disabilities are on the margins, and a lot of the time family carers aren't in receipt of any payment because they're just over the threshold. That has to be gotten rid of. I mean, you've got work caring for a child with a disability, and yet the state won't step in to offer them any support whatsoever. We're proposing that you bring forward the €350 across the board for people with disabilities, that they're given some sort of it's a mediocre standard of living as it stands at the moment. Try and get by in carers, which is 200 after you get your child support, you get €252 a week. I'd ask anyone there, could you run a house? Could you pay your rent? Could you pay your bills on €250 a week? And I think it's quite obvious, no, you couldn't. Again, like that, as I said, there's added costs for people with disabilities. It's all there, it's on gov.ie, and absolutely zero has been done to that. We're proposing in People for Profit that those costs are met. We have a massive surplus. We're constantly listening to government pontificate about how we have a rainy day fund. But I can tell you now, for carers, for families with children with disabilities, for people with long-term illness, adults who are living with long-term illness, it's pouring. It's been pouring for a long time. Fuel has increased. We've got families there who have to have the heating on, even at times when you wouldn't expect it on, because their child needs it. They're getting bills in the door for €800-900 a month, and again, no supports in place. Even with the supports from last year, with the added payments that they put on top of their cost of living package, the minimum needed to survive, according to government at the time, you were still worse off after the additional supports. All that did was bridge a gap. All that did was help people pay some bills, get them over the hump of Christmas, and now they're just This Saturday there's a cost of living coalition march. We'd encourage everyone to come out. We were the first group of people representing disabilities in the Access for All campaign to come out. Inclusion Ireland, we've got Disability Power, Physical Impairment Ireland. They're all on board now because the issue is never been great. A young woman living with a disability, a very vocal spokesperson for living in Ireland with a disability, and she coined the phrase milk and bread. That's all she can afford at the end of a week. 28-year-old young woman living in Ireland with a disability, at the end of the week, that's all she can afford. McDonald's is a treat. Now, I don't see how any government can stand up and say they're doing a good.
Very much, Bernard. Thanks very much. So, look, that's it. There's a lot more, obviously, in the document. There's, as people can see, there's climate and environmental measures such as free and equal public transport, a major retrofit programme of social housing, and very significant increases in investment in areas like developing renewable energy and afforestation. But if you want, there's a lot more, and I won't go into all the detail here, but I would encourage people to read it.
You wanted to change the government narrative that adding too much money would add to inflation, but the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council has warned that too much spending will add to inflation. The Oireachtas Budgetary Committee yesterday made a similar warning. The Nevin Economic Research Institute today made a similar warning. They're union-backed. Are you saying that all of them are wrong?
No, because you see, I'm on the Budget Scrutiny Committee, and I've been involved in all those engagements with IFAC, ESRI, and the one point they all make is there is no difficulty at doing additional expenditure as long as you raise additional revenues to cover that expenditure. Their concern is about expenditure which is based on either volatile revenues that may not last or where it's based on borrowing. So that's their concern in that regard. We've more than covered it. In fact, you'll be interested to know that our budget our very, very substantial increase in spending on housing, cost of living measures, and funding our public services do not even require using a lot of the government's budget surplus, because we're raising additional revenues from corporate profits, from raising employers' PRSI, from wealth tax, from taxes on the profits of the big digital and IT companies. There is more than enough revenue. The problem is the government never touches that revenue. They leave it in the hands of a tiny group of super profitable corporations and a tiny group of very, very wealthy people in this country. So really our budget is redistributing the wealth. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But the problem is the government isn't willing to touch much of that wealth. If you redistribute it, you don't, point of view, ours is the most responsible budget.
Other parties have said that the wealth tax, the top 10% of households, just basically how will your wealth tax work?
Well, I mean, very helpfully, the central bank have now actually, for the first time, the distribution of wealth in this country. Something we've been arguing the government should have been doing for years, although I think there's reasons why the government didn't do it. But now the central bank has confirmed what we've been saying for a decade when we've set out our wealth tax proposals, is that the richest 10% have 54% of the wealth. So it's not, the central bank is able to track the assets, financial and property and other assets that exist in this country. That's how they're able to produce these reports. They've always produced reports on the aggregate wealth and assets in the country, but what they haven't done until this year is tracked the distribution of that wealth. So if you like, the information necessary to levy a wealth tax is in the possession of the central bank. It's also in the possession of the government in terms of, obviously they know about what income people earn. They know through things like the property tax and so on, what property assets people have. So this information is all there. There just has to be the political will on the part of a government to say that those who are multi-millionaires or those who are benefiting from the super profits of big corporations because they're shareholders in those corporations should be taxed fairly, and that wealth should be invested back in ensuring that people don't live in poverty, that we have affordable housing, and that we fund our public services.
What do you say to people who say that if you put high taxes on corporations and on wealth, that it will take flight?
I think if you look at our tables and you look at the amount of profits these corporations are making, the idea that they would leave Ireland to go elsewhere doesn't make any sense, because they are making absolutely extraordinary, these are government figures, extraordinary levels of profits. Profits in 10 years have gone, aggregate corporate profits have gone 5 to 6% in real terms in tax, in effective terms. So if they had to pay a little bit more, would they leave on the Irish mechanism? And then that particular tax avoidance mechanism was closed down. Did all the corporations flee from the country? No. In fact, tax revenue went up in the country. There was more, suddenly we had more resources and the companies are still here. Because of pressure on the Irish government, they've been forced now to put the nominal rate up to 15%. Have all the multinationals fled? No. They're not, there's no way these corporations are going to leave those profits behind. So it's a scaremongering narrative that's put out by a government that really are interested in protecting, the corporate elite rather than based on any real sort of economic reality.
Expenditure on this, you also have revenue raising measures but massive expenditure, and you said this is the most realistic budget, but what do you say to people that say that actually no, this is populist and it's not grounded in reality?
You don't have, or to sort of tinker around the edges, which is what most of the major parties are doing, where it's not going to make any difference. Promise people you're going to address problems and then not. That's populism. What we're actually proposing is a redistribution of the wealth. Net household wealth in this country is the central bank's figures. I'm sure we can see it with the declaration of profits by ESB this year. ESB's half-yearly profits this year, 670, who can't pay their energy bills. Right, so it's clear there's been a redistribution upwards from ordinary people, and we're simply planning to redistribute it back down to ordinary householders and to workers. So we think that's eminently realistic. It's not millionaires in this country, but it's going to benefit the majority. But we think it's going to take very radical political change for that to happen, because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are certainly not interested.
Just to yourself, just in relation to speculation that we could be looking at disability increases of maybe €12 or that, just what's your response to that?
It's the same old story. I mean, all the data is out there. If we didn't even get that, then they brought in an increase in the domiciliary care. That's a respite care grant that's paid, and you were still about €8 a week worse off, even when they brought that back in. Now, the facts are all there. It's all on paper. People with disabilities, carers, a lot of carers too provide care in this state and don't get paid for it. If they were to withhold, or they were to actually just walk away from caring in the moment, 20 billion to meet those care needs. And we're constantly hearing €15 here, we're lucky to get it, but it's actually 12. Now, like anyone here, really hand on heart, can you say, I'd get €252 a week, a €12 increase, €264 a week. That's what you get. Can you run a house? Can you pay your bills? Can you have a quality, any sort of quality of life on that? And the answer is no. You simply cannot. And I mean, we've families there, and you have to qualify for that. And I mean, there's so many families that don't qualify. They're only a few euro over, and they're living in abject poverty. Their credit union bills just to pay they're getting credit union loans just to pay the bills. I mean, I'm a family carer. My daughter has a disability, and from all over the country, people contact us. Bills coming in the door. A woman in Clontarf, again before COVID hit, and she lives in sort of assisted living in Clontarf, but she effectively said to me, her poverty is so great, she's just here waiting to a disability, a full-time wheelchair user, who effectively said to me that she's living in that home just waiting to die. I mean, that's not a normal society, is it? Especially one as wealthy as ours. And we've always advocated just to bring people's standard of living up to a benchmark, which is just a normal standard of living where maybe you can go and catch a movie, or possibly you could meet your friends once a month for a bite to eat. You know, really simple things that predominantly people with disabilities and families care and pensioners aren't able to do in a country so wealthy as this. So wealthy. I mean, it is beguiling when you meet people and they're living in abject poverty and they're listening to the radio, they're listening to the government tell us we are unbelievably, we're fantastically wealthy. And they're just living in just, it's the worst poverty. It really is. I've met families in Cork. We do different things around the country. I've met families in Kerry, and they're just living in squalor. Really, it is. And they've nowhere to turn. And a simple increase like that, or bringing it up to just a minimum standard of living, would improve their lives greatly. And I think as a society, we benefit across the board. And that's the other thing with the Section 38 workers, or Section 39 workers. They offer huge supports to people with disabilities, give them that freedom to be participating in our society, but also they generate tax revenue. And like that again, they've been stuck in 2008 benchmark wages. And these are people that provide the most essential services and give families some sort of respite. But again, like that, they're going back again. They're probably going to go